Right, what's happening, people? Welcome back to the Joey Knight podcast, and I'm very lucky to be joined once again today by Tony Lockwood. His handle for Twitter is @LockwoodTony. Tony, how you doing, mate?
Nice to see you, Joe. Been a few weeks, hasn't it?
It has. Last time we were here, we were discussing Chelsea's poor form under Graham Potter.
You predicted Frank Lampard.
Yeah.
You got that right.
Did I predict Frank Lampard then? Yeah, good. Yeah, well, I mean, it was hardly pulling a rabbit out the hat. I think there was always one name that Chelsea fans had turned to is Frank Lampard. You did actually say to me at the time that you believed that Graham Potter would turn things round.
I did say that.
And very shortly after I thought you'd pulled a masterstroke there. We went 3 games, 3 wins. And I thought, you know what? I'm starting to see some evidence here of what Tony Lockwood was saying to me that day. Then the wheels fell off. Do you think Graham Potter should have been given more time?
So I would have taken him to the Champions League game. They sacked him after Villa, didn't they? That was a poor display. I would have given him a bit longer. And clearly, as we have seen in recent weeks, the problems at your beloved football club run a lot deeper. Frank Lampard has come in and there has been no upward movement. So it can't get much worse, can it? It can't be much more depressing than it is at the moment. So for those who would look at Graham Potter and his reign, I would still suggest that the problems lie elsewhere.
Do you think Graham Potter will go on to...
I do think he'll go on at the moment. I think Spurs are having a look at him. I think that he will land the big job, although his reputation would have been damaged by the Stamford Bridge experience. I think what he did at Brighton, certainly most people would see him as a fine football manager, but he was sold something, I would argue, at Chelsea that wasn't the case. So it wasn't all about Potter getting it wrong and an inability to manage big name players. It was a bloated squad, a scattergun transfer policy, and then having said, I'm going to give you all this time, pull the plug. So I could argue that despite his failings in a short period of time, he is still a fine football manager and will return to land a top job.
I don't think that I could see him at Spurs next season, but I tell you what, I could very much see him taking over at West Ham. I think maybe if West Ham were to win the Conference League, the Basement League, yeah. If West Ham were to win that, then maybe they'd stick with David Moyes again. But if they were to finish sort of 15th in the table and not pick up that bit of silverware, I think maybe they would move on from David Moyes, and I think Graham Potter could be one that would go in there. I was actually surprised to not see him get the Leicester job.
I think that was a good fit. I think they looked at what Dean Smith has done aside from Norwich that didn't work out, and when he was at Villa and he kept them up, and I think that they thought he was available straight away, could get him in, and he had a record of keeping a top flight club up. So I think that was the obvious move. But I agree with you.
With a hand from John Terry also.
Improved defensively, with one of the best there. But in terms of Potter, I totally agree. He was a good fit. I think he'll be a good fit for most football clubs. And at West Ham, if you look at their running, people have talked about the bottom clubs and who will go down. I think people are tending to overlook the fact that for all the European success that David Moyes might achieve, they've got a very difficult run-in.
Chelsea are on 39 points. Only 3 times in the history of the Premier League since it became 20 teams has a team gone down on more than 39 points. I think that West Ham team, do you remember the really good West Ham team that went down with a lot of young talent? Actually went down on 42 points, which is mental. When Thomas Tuchel left Chelsea, 6 games in charge in the Premier League, and he had acquired 10 points from that 6 games. It seemed as a very poor total, from a possible 30. Without Thomas Tuchel there at the start of the season, do you believe that Chelsea would have been relegated this year?
Based on the points return, they would be in a real mess. If you'd said to me, would Chelsea finish in the bottom half of the table, I'd have said to you that's unthinkable. As we talk, it is a distinct possibility. I don't personally think it's going to happen, but then I thought there'd be the upturn in form which lasted 3 or 4 games and then went again. But my issue with Chelsea at the moment is how far do they drop below what we saw at Arsenal the other night? How much lower does it get for them?
So you don't think that Chelsea will finish in the bottom half of the table?
I don't think Chelsea will finish in the bottom half of the table.
As a Chelsea fan now, who is usually a very optimistic Chelsea fan, I can tell you now, we are definitely definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, finishing in the bottom half of the table.
Right.
I don't see us taking points.
We'll talk at the end of May. So where you don't see any points coming the way of Chelsea? You don't see any form of picking up enough points to see you finish in the top half of the table?
No, I think the most optimistic we could hope for would be 4 points from our remaining games. I don't think we'll get a win against Bournemouth. I don't think we get a win against Nottingham Forest. I honestly, I'm not just being pessimistic on purpose. I'm not trying to give out clickbait. I don't see us getting a win from either of those matches. I tell you what we don't do is we do not get a win against Newcastle and Man City, isn't it? So there you go. You can write the points off straight away there. As a neutral, what do you think of this heavily rumoured Pochettino appointment?
Almost inevitable. I would have liked to see what happened with Luis Enrique. I'm not quite sure why those talks didn't advance if you looked at what he'd achieved at club and international level. Nagelsmann, there clearly was an issue between the board and him in terms of the way the club was going to go from a direction point of view, recruitment, who he was working with. There seemed to be a number of differences there.
I don't think Nagelsmann wanted it
or not after the Bayern experience coming straight back in, but there were clearly issues. So if we take Enrique out of the equation, and I'm throwing footballing names in, Pochettino's been out, wants to get back in. Look at what he's done at Spurs, wins a trophy at PSG, and I agree most managers would expect to win the title at PSG, but has a decent pedigree behind him. You take aside the rivalry between Chelsea and Spurs and say, I can understand why they're going for him.
Can you see why a lot of Chelsea fans do have a bit of a grievance towards him going with Pochettino?
Because of the rivalry between Chelsea and Tottenham. But ultimately, if the manager comes in and wins games, then that's all that really matters at the end, doesn't it? We've seen unpopular managerial choices, but ultimately, whether that manager stays or goes depends on how successful he is at your football club, and that is what will be remembered. Pochettino has a hell of a job to take on, and then in terms of who they get rid of, trim a bloated squad, bring a goalkeeper in, bring a 20-goal scorer in, for me would be the two main priorities straight away, and then rebuild, and then you trust in the manager and you give him the option to work the way that he wants to work, and you sit back and you don't interfere, and then it's a big job, isn't it? It's a big rebuild job at your football club, but Pochettino would be the obvious candidate, clearly.
I was never massively in favour of Julian Nagelsmann. Nagelsmann, for me, was a more proven version of Graham Potter, almost. And I don't mean that in stylistically in the way they play. I mean that in terms of a young manager who will be coming through the door, and maybe the job might be a little bit overwhelming for him. Now, you might say he's just managed Bayern Munich, but the standards at Bayern Munich are also really high. And you probably get given a little bit more time at Bayern Munich than historically, even though it wasn't Todd Bowley's ownership, than you do at Chelsea. Julian Nagelsmann wasn't my first choice. I wanted Carlo Ancelotti because it's been heavily rumoured that he would leave Real Madrid at the end of the season. But I suppose that when you're looking to actually make plans, you can't go on if, buts and maybes. For me, the obvious option then became Luis Enrique. And I really don't understand why we didn't get Luis Enrique. Now, Luis Enrique is what I always bang on about, a proven winner. And the whole thing with this proven winner thing is you could go, of course Luis Enrique won. He had Messi, Neymar, Suarez up front. Okay. But Pochettino had Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe, who I'm pretty sure if you ask 100 people, 100 will rate a prime Mbappe over a prime Suarez, and I don't even think it was a prime Suarez at Barcelona at the time. So the point I'm trying to make is Luis Enrique, yes, was given the luxury of having an unbelievable squad, but he also had to contend against a top Atletico Madrid side, a top Real Madrid side. And who did Pochettino have to contend against over at PSG? Lille, Lyon, Monaco. And Pochettino had 2 seasons there. He only won the league in one of those seasons. Then, to flip it on its head and play devil's advocate, you could sort of say the same about Thomas Tuchel. He had only really won the French league with PSG, got them to a Champions League final and lost, which obviously, Pochettino has done with Spurs before. So I'm interested to see how it goes. And as I've said before, I will get behind Pochettino. I think it's almost one of those things that at first you'll really rebel against it and really think, oh no, I don't want that. And like anything, a lot of Chelsea fans have a lot of hatred for Romelu Lukaku. But if he comes back and bangs in a hat-trick in his first match...
It's all forgotten. The thing I'd like to know about Enrique, they clearly spoke to him. Why did that break down? Because he was the clear candidate. He was available, and as we've discussed, he had the proven track record, a style of football that I think would suit your football club.
Really good style.
So we're ticking all the boxes, aren't we? With Nagelsmann, we could argue he wanted this, they wanted that, direction of the football club, would it have worked? With Enrique, you think, well, it's a job that he would want and Chelsea would want him. So I would like to understand why that never happened, because I agree with you. If I had a choice, going back to when he was in talks, that seemed to be the obvious option for Chelsea Football Club.